All right. Good afternoon. Welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad Podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I am your host, EL, America's most delayed libertarian. A little bit late today. Post started at 7:30, aimed for an 8 o'clock. Then I was like, all right, got to push it till noon. Here we are. Had a technical difficulty. I know. You guys get tired of hearing it, but I do appreciate the fact that you guys... I appreciate that you guys wait on me. I really do. And I'll explain the technical difficulty that I was running into as we get into the show to make more sense, at least for people that are watching the show, once I get into things. So I do want to tell you, if you are a candidate running for office and you'd like an opportunity to be on the show and to tell people about your platform, the position that you're running for, and so on and so forth, then head on over to candidates.libertydad.com and get yourself booked. The link will be in the show notes. Available times are Tuesday and Thursday mornings at 7:30 a.m., which I'm not late for on those. Different story. Wednesday and Thursday evenings at 7:30 p.m. All times are Eastern. Speaking of, there will be no interviews this week. And that's because, as I said last week, my son is on spring vacation. And then I've got some things that I'm doing with him. So I won't be doing any interviews this week. And I'm only going to do a show today and tomorrow. And then after that, I'm taking time off and I'm going to spend, the time with my son. I'll probably get online and harass people and, give them the good old Liberty Dad punch or whatever, whatever it is. But so that's what we've got going on this week. Speaking of, I'm just curious. Do you guys enjoy the interviews? Do you enjoy the bill reviews of the culture? Like, jump in the comments now or later, that's fine. And just kind of give me some feedback and say, hey, man, you're doing great on the interviews. Or, hey, I wish you would, ask these kind of questions. Or, wish they were shorter or longer or whatever. I'm open to hearing what you guys think. Same with the bill reviews. Same with my culture topics. Dad talk, all that good stuff. I'm really curious how you guys see the show and if there are areas for which I could improve. Obviously, being more timely is one of them. So you don't have to jump in there and be like, well, if you say 7:30, I get it. Trust me, I get stressed out when I'm not right at 7:30 hitting that go live button. So that's just where we are. Okay. All that being said, let's get into today's topic. I got a couple of them actually. I'm going to start with the big heavy hitter, and we're going to talk about Senator Mark Kelly versus Hegseth, Pete Hegseth. There's actual lawsuit. Now, if you remember, Senator Kelly with some other senators came out and they had this video. They were basically saying, like, they didn't say anything illegal. They were saying, hey, you should only follow legal orders. But the way that it was framed was kind of like, perhaps the Trump administration is giving you illegal orders. You should probably not follow those. Like, they didn't outright say it. Like, they didn't say the Trump administration is giving you unlawful orders, therefore you should not follow them. It was insinuated through the by virtue of them just simply saying, you don't have to, you're not obligated to follow lawful orders. In fact, you should not, right? Which is what what soldiers get in their training. When I was in the military back in early 2000s, they actively told us you are explicitly not supposed to follow unlawful orders. Now that gets into a gray area. Like, there are some things, like if you're in battle and you come across a town and there are like women and children there and there's like nobody with any arms, like like firearms or whatnot, and there's only men there that are just chilling and whatever, maybe they're working in the field, and then your commanding officer's like, just kill everybody and burn the town to the ground. Like, that would be a pretty clear unlawful order. You get into murky waters elsewhere because a lot of times you're not given all the information, so on and so forth. And so it becomes a little bit less clear in certain situations. And so we have to be very careful. We can't just tell our military run around and not follow orders because, a lot of people aren't good at judging what is right and what is wrong necessarily, especially if they're not given the full context of things. So there could be orders that might on the surface seem like they're unlawful, but with more information, they would be lawful. And most people would probably agree. And then the opposite is also true. There could be orders that were given that are clearly, that sound lawful, but are actually unlawful. And, but it's not clear until you get further information about it. Right. So it might seem that they're lawful, but then you find out like, oh, with this other information that I didn't have, turns out it's an unlawful order. Right. So you have this range of area. And, so I was like, look, this is the First Amendment issue. I don't see any issue with the video other than it was clearly publicity. Like, it was not anything other than publicity. And I told people, I said, look, if you're a soldier, this is what I said in episode like 625, something like that. I said, if you're a soldier and you follow this, just know that the people in this video are not likely going to be coming to your defense if you're on trial for not following an order that maybe you should have, right? You're on your own for that. So in some ways, that's kind of a good thing, right? Because that means we want our military to not follow orders when they truly believe they're not lawful orders, not just because some senator or whomever said so, right? We want to be very clear because we have a chain of command and we want to respect that. So that's what I said. Now, the reason I'm bringing this back up again is because there's been some new information with a court ruling, and we're going to go through the court ruling. I like to read those, and I found the arguments in there pretty fascinating. So before we get into that, let's focus on, Bill seems a little shorter today. Yeah, he's like, yeah, I gotta work on that. I gotta work on a lot of things, but I'm telling you, like, folks, I am working hard to deliver a good show. But I will say this, the available times that I have set aside, if for some reason something happens and I can't get what I need done, or I run into an issue or something like that, there's not a lot of other time to compensate with. So that's the big challenge. Also, I will be straightforward with you. I'm not exactly the best steward of my time. It's just I'm not always so good at it. Like my wife will tell you that. Like if she's listening, she'll be like, "Well, you could use your calendar more." In fact, that Liberty lady in the chat here would be like, "You could use your calendar more." And even though I use it, then I'd have to follow it, right? Because like I get sidetracked. I'm like, "Oh, I gotta like here's this thing," and it's like, "But I'm supposed to be doing this right now. Hold up," So Addison for Liberty says, "You sound congested like me." Yes, I am. I am getting over like 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks of being, I don't know. I thought it was a cold. Then I thought it was allergies. Then I thought I was dying. I don't know. It's all over the place. So yes, I am congested. So bear with me, folks. So before we get into this, though, let's get back on topic here. Before we get into this, I want to reiterate something, and you probably know this, but just in case, we will reiterate it because it helps us to understand the situation here. So you have three branches of government. Okay, you've got the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. Just very generically speaking, the legislative branch, they're there to make the laws. The executive branch is there to execute and enforce the laws. And the judicial branch is there to interpret the laws and resolve disputes. Now, we often have a tendency to look to them for what is and is not constitutional. And that's not bad, as long as we also read the Constitution and come to our own opinion. And you should, at some point, disagree with the judicial branch. You should, at some point, disagree with every branch of government. You should never, ever, always agree with them. And sometimes when you disagree, you will be correct. I would say probably more so than not. And then sometimes you'll disagree with them and you will be wrong. And that's okay. Right? I think that people should have a larger role in, in what constitutes being constitutional. But that is a much longer conversation for a different day. So I wanted to kind of lay that groundwork because a lot of people will argue and they will say, well, the judicial branch, they're full of activist judges. And I can tell usually before I've even looked at the ruling, whether or not the person has even read the ruling. Okay. And it's usually based on how they're presenting. Like if they say, this is an activist judge, they ruled this and they said this, and I disagree, and this is how it's, unconstitutional, blah, blah. And if they kind of lay out even some argument as to what the judge actually said, then I have to read the ruling to see if I agree. But in many cases, people just don't like the end result. And so they'll say, oh, these activist judges. And a lot of times, I would say most of the time, you're not really dealing with an activist judge. You might be dealing with an activist judge. You're more than likely, if we get a result, a ruling that we disagree with, that we don't like, there's a good chance that you just simply have an underlying disagreement with how to approach constitutional interpretation. That is more than likely the case, not so much that they are an activist sitting on the bench just trying to leverage their power to their advantage. More often than not, they've got some underlying jurisprudence that you disagree with. And it's worth knowing that so that we can make better arguments, so that if you want to see something play out or you don't want to see something play out, then you can make the proper arguments for that to occur. Okay? So a while back, and we'll go over here to the Department of War, they had this to say, all right, on their social media. They said this is their official statement regarding that video with Senator Mark Kelly. They said the Department of War has received serious allegations of misconduct against Captain Mark Kelly, United States Navy retired, in accordance with the Uniform Code of Military Justice and other applicable regulations. A thorough review of these allegations has been initiated to determine further actions, which may include recall to active duty for court-martialing proceedings or administrative measures. Okay? Now, on that, I don't necessarily have a problem per se. It's kind of vague. Like they're like, hey, we've got some allegations. Now we know what they were about. But just on the face value of those words, I don't take an issue, right? Because it is in the United States, it is in the UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It is in there that you could be recalled and that you could face some sort of punishment for your actions later. And we would have to determine what actions are we talking about to determine whether or not I think it would be appropriate. In this particular case, it's his freedom of speech. Then it goes on and says, this matter will be handled in compliance with military law, ensuring due process and impartiality. Okay, fair enough. No argument there. Further official comments will be limited to preserve the integrity of the proceedings. Fair enough. The Department of War reminds all individuals that military retirees remain subject to the UCMJ for applicable offenses and federal laws such as, and then it gives a law, which prohibit actions intended to interfere, this is where we're starting to get into the problem, interfere with loyalty, morale, or good order and discipline of the armed forces. Any violations will be addressed through appropriate legal channels. All service members are reminded that they have a legal obligation under the UCMJ to obey lawful orders, and that orders are presumed to be lawful. A service member's personal philosophy does not justify or excuse the disobedience of an otherwise lawful order. And I went in and I explained to you, I said, the big challenge here, and I mentioned it a moment ago, is let's say I'm in the military and I think that a law, an order is a violation of the law. Okay. And it could be one of the more murky ones. Doesn't matter what it is. We don't have to try to come up with an example necessarily. The catch is, if it's not simple, I'm taking a big risk. I appreciate that because I don't want everybody just not following orders and then falling back on the lame excuse like, well, I thought it was illegal. Okay. Because I thought it was illegal isn't a good reason. If you're not willing to potentially get in trouble for it, then I kind of doubt whether or not you really believe it. And that's the kind of society that I would like to live in, where people act on what they strongly believe in and are willing to put themselves on the line, whether it's monetarily, physically, legally, so on and so forth, right? I think that makes for the best kind of society when people say, I think this is wrong, I'm going to stand against it, and I'm willing to take the consequences, whatever those may be, you know, to take this stand. That's the best situation. Now, is it perfect? No, it's not perfect at all. So a lot of people came out and they were saying crazy stuff about Senator Mark Kelly. Now, he's a Democrat, okay? I'm not big on Democrats. I'm not really big on Republicans either. If you had to force me and say, DL, which one are you more than likely going to vote for? It's kind of tough because the Republicans can be all over the place. Democrats sometimes are all over the place. I voted for both. But I would say, I guess more often than not, I would probably be inclined to support a Republican. Okay. But that doesn't mean I don't have serious misgivings with them. So let's not mistake anything. Okay. So Mark Kelly, Senator Kelly, is on the team that I would identify with less than the other team. Okay. Less. So like Democrat, less than Republican, less than Libertarian. Okay. That's where I am. So I'm not exactly defending somebody of a party that I largely support. And I give the Republicans hell anyway, so it wouldn't matter. All right. So a lot of people came out, they were like, this is treason, this is sedition. And I was like, words have meanings. You guys are retarded. This was kind of like, I gave better arguments than that, but I was speckling in there, sprinkling in, insults as well, because I was like, you're just being ridiculous at this point. Because words like treason and sedition, he wasn't like, if you watch the video, and I don't have it at the moment, but if you watch the video, they weren't exactly trying to like overthrow the government. They weren't telling everybody, stop doing your jobs, lay down your arms, let the enemy come over, do it. They weren't saying any crazy stuff like that. They were just like, look, maybe if there's an order out there that's illegal, maybe you don't follow it because that's the law, which is true. That is the law, right? And I can say that. You can say that, right? That we have freedom of speech to say that. So I defended it. So a lot of people like to say, oh, activist judges, or they'll like to throw out words like treason and sedition and stuff like that. And they're not really held accountable to it, right? They just get to say things, and that's fine. Like that's your freedom of speech to be foolish and not be held accountable. But on this show, we like to, meaning me, myself, and I, we like to make it a point to show you our work. Okay, now I'm going to be talking with my multiple personalities, who are also all congested. So let's pull this up and let's take a look. We're going to look at the summary of this first, because I think the summary is the most interesting thing to start with. So here we are. And then, by the way, I just want to point out, you might, if you've watched the show before and you've seen my bill reviews, you know this is a different look. This is why I had a problem this morning, because I found it very difficult to put up PDF documents, which rulings and laws, that's how they come. They're in PDF documents. And there's all kind of technical problems with that. So then I was like, all right, well, I'll just copy and paste the text. And so I found a clever way that would allow me to do it. But then I started running into some problems where some of the sentences were longer than what I had a portion, set up for on my screen. And so it was making it really wonky. And I was like, initially trying to adjust the font size, but then you'd have like really small font for just like a short sentence, but then really big font for a short sentence, really really small font for larger sentences. And it just got kind of really tricky. And then I was like, all right, I'm not gonna be able to do my show this morning until I get this resolved. So I spent the time to resolve it instead of having a show. So anyway, here's what the beginning of the ruling says. United States Senator Mark Kelly, a retired naval officer, has been censured by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth for voicing certain opinions on military actions and policy. In addition, he has been subjected to proceedings to possibly reduce his retirement rank and pay, and threatened with criminal prosecution if he continues to speak out on these issues. Okay, so this is a big deal, right? He's a sitting senator, and he has been guaranteed for his service a certain level of pay and a rank, which is associated with this pay. And then, of course, he gets to say, I was a captain or whatever, right? So this is not insignificant. This isn't just like saying, hey, you shut up, you're wrong, right? That would be fine, whatever. This is now actual punishment and potential criminal prosecution. So now we need to pay attention. We need to realize this is something important. And whether we like him or not, whether he's a Democrat or not, we need to identify and say, okay, is this where we want to go with this? Is this the right path? Is the rationale behind this proper? All right. And so this is the opening statement of the judge. And so then he goes on and he says, Secretary Hegseth relies on the well-established doctrine that military service members enjoy less vigorous First Amendment protections given the fundamental obligation for obedience and discipline in the armed forces. I don't actually have a problem with this. We have a volunteer military, and when you sign up, you agree to certain things, and you say, like, look, my First Amendment is more limited than, say, DL's, because DL doesn't have information that could cause problems with our military. I've said before, I don't like the idea of us going to war. However, if we go to war, I want to win, which means we need, certain level of discipline. We need certain level of badassery, right? So I'm okay with that. And I get it. It makes sense. We can't have soldiers just divulging all the secrets all over the place, because that could endanger their own lives and the lives of their fellow service members. And yes, the government does exploit that, because they like to say, oh, this endangers, our agents. This endangers our soldiers. And they won't tell you what it is that endangers them. So you just got to trust them. And I don't really do the whole trust the government thing. Right. But there is a certain reality that, yes, some things, that information perhaps in the moment don't need to come out. We can learn them later, perhaps. And there might even be perhaps some information for which, hey, you don't get to declassify this for a very long time. Maybe it's related to strategic issues, and you don't necessarily want the enemy learning like what your strategies are. And so then they can adapt to them, attack you, and then be ready, right? It sounds movie-like, but there is a reality there. All right. So then it goes on, and I think this is the part where I really enjoyed. Unfortunately for Secretary Hegseth, no court has ever extended those principles to retired service members, much less a retired service member serving in Congress and exercising oversight responsibility over the military. This court will not be the first to do so. I thought that was a very interesting, like, opening salvo, if you will, because he's pointing out, it's like, look, we've never done this. Now, let's be clear. Just because something has never been done doesn't mean that we should never do it. Also, on the flip side, just because something has always been done is in itself not a reason to continue doing it, right? It's fair to respect traditions, but at the same time, there might be an exception to the tradition. And so if people want to claim and say, well, the court is wrong, they're going to have to read the judge's ruling and understand why he said what he said, why he ruled what he ruled, in order for them to say, yes, this was a good ruling, or no, it was not, right? You can't do it any other way. So that is kind of like the initial summary. So I've got 3 more components that we're going to read through. We're not going to read all. It's like 29-page ruling, so we can't read the whole thing, obviously. I've slimmed it down to just the parts that I think are valuable to you as the audience member, so that you have a better understanding of, okay, here's this Democrat. He did a publicity stunt, totally legal. You can do that. It's dumb. I hate it, but it's legal, right? He engaged in a publicity stunt. He was engaging in his First Amendment, and then the military now wants to come and punish him. Okay, so now we have to determine, okay, is that the right thing to do? Okay, so we're starting off, we're saying, hey, this is not something that we normally do. Okay, well, now we need to dig into the details. So let's talk about judicial review, because a lot of people are like, the judges, why do they have all this power over everybody? Okay, well, as I pointed out, one of their jobs is to interpret the law and then also resolve disputes. So right now, Senator Kelly is in dispute with Secretary Hegseth, and it's a big dispute. They're not just arguing on Twitter. This could possibly lead to criminal charges and a reduction in pay for which he is entitled to. Okay, he did his service. He signed an agreement. I generally like to keep our agreements. Okay, so he's entitled to it, and not just entitled in the sense like you signed up for SNAP benefits. Entitled in the sense he gave time, he gets this money for giving that time, right? It was a trade. He traded his labor and his time for money, which we all do. All right. So let's talk about judicial review, because a lot of people want to act as if, hey, maybe the court is overstepping its boundaries. And there are situations where the court does that. Typically, a higher court will say, hey, you guys are you were exceeding your jurisdiction. That's happened. That's happened against Trump. That's happened in favor of Trump, right? And many other people, right? So this happens on a regular basis. This is not new. So let's look into the next one here. So it says, speaking broadly, federal courts grant substantial deference to the military when it acts within its sphere of authority. Okay, fair enough. Courts are rightly wary of second-guessing professional military judgments as to the composition, training, equipping, and control of a military force. Military personnel decisions, however, are not entirely exempt from judicial review. So he's laying the groundwork, right? The judge, and I think his name is Judge Leon, I think is his name. And just in case you were wondering, is he like a conservative or is he liberal? Okay, there's really no such thing. Okay, I've talked about this before. But he was put into place by George W. Bush. And to my knowledge, he generally is seen as a more conservative judge. So he doesn't even fit the activist label in terms of he's on the other team. Okay. Well, anyway, looking at this here, and this makes sense, right? We don't want the courts ruling on everything that the military does. But that doesn't mean that they can't rule on anything. And this is why I pointed out the 3 branches of government, because you have the Constitution. Whatever. Got the Constitution, and then below that, in a little org chart, you would have the legislative, executive, and judicial branches, right? And then somewhere below that, you would have the military, right? The military is subject to Congress. They answer to Congress and the president, right? The Congress can bring them in. They can bring generals in, and they can question them and say, why did you do this? Why was this in your report? Why? Okay? That is how the authority of the United States works. So they do have judicial review. They can review some things, but the courts tend to decline many things and say, like, look, this is part of your sphere of authority. We're staying out. And the court does that all the time. Like you might hear the Supreme Court, you might hear about the Supreme Court saying something like, that's a political question. So sometimes they won't get involved in a dispute between the executive branch and the legislative branch because they'll say, yeah, that's a question of political question. That's not really one for us to resolve. You guys go figure that out, right? So they do that sometimes. And you've heard the Supreme Court will sometimes they will say, hey, they're refusing to hear a particular case, and they've got a variety of reasons. One of the more obvious ones that everybody can understand would be like, do you have standing? Like, is this relevant to you? Okay. And many cases, people try to file a lawsuit with something that like, they'll say like, well, I don't like how the government's spending my money and I'm a taxpayer. And so it's like, yeah, but a lot of people are taxpayers. So in that particular case, you would have to do something more like a class action suit gathered together. You couldn't just do it on your own. So like, and that's just an example of where the court would say, yeah, you don't have standing. You're not in a position to say this has directly and uniquely harmed me. So therefore, we're not going to hear the case, right? So courts sometimes just refuse to hear cases. All right, let's go on. All right, Senator Kelly's claims. Let me move my notes here. Senator Kelly's claims do not require this court to adjudicate the merits of discretionary military decisions, but only to ask whether defendants' actions conforms to the law. Okay, so they're like, look, we're not trying to like. What Senator Kelly has come to us and said is not, hey, will you intervene and rule on the military's decision in this military decision, in this military framework here. He's saying, hey, I think there's an issue with the law that supersedes the military, the First Amendment in this case. And in our constitutional republic, it is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is, not the military. So he's correct, right? The military doesn't get to go out and say, this is the law, you have to follow it. Now they could say, these are our rules, you have to follow them, right? And so long as those rules do not violate the law, then yes, you are required as a service member to obey them and to follow them, execute them, right? So that is very true. So he's basically laid out, he's like, we've addressed this issue of can the court say anything, right? So now let's talk about the First Amendment. Okay, we're going to get more specific on the First Amendment here. So the First Amendment prohibits government officials from retaliating against individuals for engaging in protected speech. To demonstrate First Amendment retaliation, Senator Kelly must show, one, he engaged in First Amendment in conduct protected under the First Amendment. So that's the first thing he's going to have to do. Like, hey, was this protected in the first place? In other words, could DL say this? If DL could say this, then we have protected speech. If DL can't say this, then perhaps it's not protected speech, right? Perhaps only in the sense that, you know, we'd have to evaluate whether or not it's been deemed as explicitly. Let me rephrase that. If it is protected speech, then we've probably already addressed it. If it's not protected speech, we might have addressed it, but we might need to revisit it. That's what I'm getting at. All right, so then we go on. Number two, this is the second leg. Defendants took some retaliatory action sufficient to deter a person of ordinary firmness in his position from speaking again. Okay? So the action here, reduction in pay, potential criminal prosecution, that would say, hey, this is retaliation and you better not do it again. Right? So yes, we're now at the second leg. Right? Second leg is true. This is what the judge is saying. Like, this is how we identify whether or not there's a First Amendment here to be addressed. Third, there is a causal link between the exercise of a constitutional right and the adverse action taken against him. Like, there's a direct link. It's not like he's being punished for the actions that he's taken that are unrelated to his speech. It's explicitly the constitutional right, free speech, and the action taken, which basically means Pete Hegseth came out and said, you can't say that, we're coming after you. That's basically what he said. Okay, well, great. And he did that. The Department of War, they had their like more lofty language there that I read. But elsewhere, Pete Hegseth was like, yeah, we're coming for you. Okay, so now number 3 has been met. All right, we go on. This case largely hinges on the first prong. That makes sense. If it's protected speech, then we got to address it. If it's not protected speech, well, we're done. So it pretty much relies on that one. Whether Senator Kelly engaged in protected speech. Defendants boldly argue that Senator Kelly's speech was unprotected, citing to a line of precedent establishing that First Amendment protections are more limited in the military context. Okay, that's an argument. It's an argument you can say, hey, it is protected. However, for military members, they are not permitted to engage in this particular type of speech for these reasons that we have all these other court cases that address, right? And that say they can't do that. Basically, if I'm overseas and I want to get on Twitter and I want to say, man, we're about to go over to this town and we think there's some terrorists there. We're going to go and get them. Right? I could get in trouble. And then the military could be like, yeah, that's not protected speech, buddy. You literally gave out the details of your mission online and you endangered, every troop that was heading over there, right? And possibly even civilians. Okay? So there are some, again, I've addressed it and I said, I agree. There are some contexts under which, no, you would not be permitted to engage in freedom of speech or fall under freedom of speech. Under ordinary First Amendment principles, the speech at issue here is unquestionably protected speech. Speech on matters of public concern lies at the core of the First Amendment protection. Defendants rest their entire First Amendment defense on the argument that the more limited First Amendment protection for active duty members, continuing on here, of the military extends to a retired naval captain. Okay? So now we understand the nature of the argument. They're like, look, he couldn't say this if he was in the military because he might reduce readiness, he might reduce the willingness of soldiers to do their job by putting into question whether or not the orders in general were lawful, rather than specifying something specific. So it's one thing if somebody comes out and says, I know you guys heard this and you were told to do this. That is an unlawful order. Okay, that's a very specific situation. But it's much different to come out and say, there could be some unlawful orders out there and you shouldn't follow them. Okay, well, which ones specifically? Okay. And to be honest with you, I would argue that there's probably a lot of unlawful orders. I'm just kind of making a guess, but that's just my opinion is that the military isn't so squeaky clean that they only ever give lawful orders. Now, not every unlawful order is like the worst in the world. It's not like they're saying, hey, go mass slaughter a bunch of people. They could just be giving you like, hey, if somebody's in intelligence, it might be like, why don't you show me what that person just texted? Okay, that's unlawful. Not quite to the same level of, slaughtering mass numbers of people, but it's unlawful. So there's variations of them. All right. To be sure, while soldiers are not excluded from the First Amendment's coverage, the different character of the military community and of the military mission requires different application of those protections. Okay? So they're just basically highlighting and saying the application of all of this varies. Okay? And in the military, we have a certain character, we have a certain community, we have certain things under which we are abiding by. There are certain rules that work here. And that's how it is in any body, any body that you join. If you go to the YMCA, there are certain rules and regulations for which they have, right? It's kind of a contrived issue comparison, but it makes the point very well. No matter where you go, any group of people, they're going to have their rules. And they're based on the functioning of that entity. So then we go on here. Where am I here? Yeah, we could keep going. Active duty soldiers operate in a specialized society separate from civilian society, where the law is that of obedience, lest the military's critical mission of maximum effectiveness and lethality be undermined. As such, active duty soldiers urging others to disregard orders or calling into question a commander's credibility may directly undermine the effectiveness of our system of representative government. Wait a minute. The effectiveness of... I must be missing something. May directly undermine the effectiveness. We'll just say of the military. I think that's what it was. I might have cut it off by accident. Might have had a little mistake there. All right. But ultimately, it can undermine the effectiveness of the military. So again, as I said a moment ago, if I'm a soldier and somebody's casting doubt on the commander, like, man, that commander's lost his mind, he's giving out all these bad orders. Now I might go, well, oh, crap, I don't want to follow a bad order. And I don't know if he's giving out good orders or bad orders necessarily, or if I think that maybe he's giving out some bad orders, then I might question some of them. I might question the wrong ones, not question the right ones, so on and so forth. So you see how this could break down in the military, okay? And this is very important for active duty soldiers. So then we go on. Our system, oh, I swear that must have, let me take a look at that. It seems kind of weird. I feel like there's more to that. I feel like there's a little bit more that was necessary. Okay, whatever. That's fine. That's okay. Maybe I made a mistake. Let's see. Let me take a look here. No, I think this is. Did I just miss him? Okay. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. It's okay. Maybe I made a mistake. It's been a rough morning. Whatever. Okay. So point being here is that we need to be mindful that yes, there are situations for which the military cannot say certain things, and that's okay. Now, let's talk about Senator Kelly's unique role, because this plays an additional part. Because remember, he was a captain in the Navy. Now he's retired, right? So he's no longer in the military. So he's no longer part of that active duty community, right? And soldiers that leave the military say all kind of things. They'll agree with an administration. Some will disagree with the administration. Some will say it's treason. Some will say it's not treason. Some will call people heroes. Some will call people, anti-heroes, whatever. They'll call them, anything. So I think it's fair to say that soldiers in the military who are active duty recognize that outside of the military, people that have left the military, whether they've retired or whether they've just served a handful of years and came and didn't technically retire, they say all kind of things. So we're not necessarily worrying that, hey, you need to follow the guy that's on Twitter, okay? But he also is a senator, so that adds a little more twist. Our system of representative government requires that legislators be given the widest latitude to express their views on issues of policy. Legislators like Senator Kelly carry an obligation to take positions on controversial political questions, both so their constituents may be fully informed as to the legislator's views, and so constituents may be represented in governmental debates by the person they have elected to represent them. This is really, I think, the biggest core of the problem. And that is, he's not just retired. He's not just now a civilian. He is also a representative of people. I want my representatives reviewing everything. Every military, everything. I have been screaming at the top of my lungs, not literally, but I've been screaming at the top of my lungs and saying, hey, I think this war in Iran, yes, it's a war. I think this is illegal. I think we've made major violations here. I want my representatives to ask the tough questions. I cannot afford, as a citizen who has representation in government, the federal government specifically, in this case, I cannot afford to have a representative who cannot ask questions or cannot make general statements for fear that they could be punished by an entity that they're supposed to be overseeing. Do you see the problem that we have here now? Senators routinely will bring in people from the military. They'll have a Senate hearing. They'll ask them questions. A lot of it's grandstanding. Nonetheless, they ask questions and they make decisions on how they want to move forward. Maybe they want to punish somebody, right? Whatever. They cannot do that effectively if they're worried that, hey, if I suggest this thing about the military and the military says, oh, but you were prior military, you can't say that, we're going to punish you. Well, then how is he going to be a representative to people? Right? So then what you end up having people want to talk about activist. You have an activist military. The military is subordinate to Congress, period. It's not, they don't get to tell Congress what to do. Okay? Now, you might argue, say, well, under martial law, this or that. Okay. We're not under any of those. So there's no extreme situation under which the military, which I would argue against anyway, but there's no situation like that exists. Okay? The situation right now is this senator, was saying, I think there's some orders that are unlawful that are being given by the president. You have a duty to not follow them. That is true. Now, I, as the citizen, it's my responsibility to say, bro, you were totally just doing publicity stunt. Yes, you were correct. You can do all of that, but that was a publicity stunt. Why? Because I argue, as I said earlier, if a soldier actually got in trouble and said, well, I saw a video from Mark Kelly that I shouldn't do this, they're going to get in trouble. And that's not going to be a defense for them. They're not going to be in there under UCMJ hearings and be like, objection, soldier was just following what the senator said. That's not how the chain of command works. Okay? He does not follow. And Senator Kelly will not be there to defend him. Almost a guarantee. Right? That's why I say it was a publicity stunt. But it was a very, very legal publicity stunt. And if even on this publicity stunt, he were to lose, we would have a more ineffective Congress. So this is why it's a problem. So everybody wants to talk about like activist this, activist that. How about your activist Secretary of War? How about that? Activist Secretary of War, because he's taking more power than he has. And I have a sneaky suspicion that he knows better. Right? Because at the end of the day, Mark Kelly probably knows this isn't going to go anywhere, right? And so he's probably not too terribly worried other than the annoyance of having to deal with it, right? But that doesn't mean that other people who are prior military won't then say, well, he's a senator. He, of course, can say this. I can't because I'm not a senator. See the problem there? So for me, by the way, this ruling, this was an injunction, so it's not a guarantee, but this was an injunction on the Department of War trying to punish Senator Kelly, and like that doesn't mean like the injunction could end up being overturned later, and the courts can deal with that. But for me, I look and I say this is an absolute win for justice, okay? Because for me, the First Amendment reigns supreme. The Constitution reigns supreme because that is the governing document that pretty much everybody in the United States has agreed to live by, right? Now, yeah, I know there's some anarchists out there that are like, you can make your arguments and convince your fellow man. We're not there right now. Where we are is we have a United States Constitution that everybody's agreed to. That's where we are. All right. So hopefully that makes more sense to you. You understand just a little bit more about how to read and understand a ruling, where it is, and when to say, yes, maybe there's an activist judge going, engaging in some behaviors here that they shouldn't be, or say that's nonsense. In this particular case, it would be absolute nonsense to say it's an activist judge. He was appointed by a Republican. He's known to be very conservative. And when you read his ruling, he is doing more than just saying, I think you should be able to say that. He is literally laying out a case and saying, here is why I'm issuing this injunction. And I think he's correct. And I think what you're going to find out is that this case won't go anywhere. And I'm pretty sure Hegseth and all those JAG officers and everybody else, I think they know. All right, let's move into my next topic here. New York bill, Senate Bill 7263. You may or may not have seen this. Try to go through this kind of quickly. So it says, New York wants to ban the AI that outscores doctors. I keep wanting to see SB because I'm used to the Senate bills. Senate Bill 7263, so this is a state level bill, would ban AI from answering medical and legal questions, protecting billable hours while the people who can't afford doctors lose their only option. Not a big fan of the sub headline here. Usually never. You shouldn't be. You should be like, okay, whatever. You're just trying to trying to make me want to read this. And they did. That's fine. Oops, I clicked on a button. I didn't mean to. All right. So what's going on here? So Senate Bill 7263, sponsored by Senator Kristen Gonzalez out of Queens, the Working Families Party, just pointing that out, and chair of the committee that approved it, would hold AI companies civilly liable for chatbots that provide, quote, substantive responses in a 13 plus licensed professions, or not a, but just in 13, in more than 13 licensed professions. This covers medicine, law, dentistry, nursing, psychology, social work, engineering, architecture, pharmacy, optometry, podiatry, physical therapy, and veterinary medicine. That's crazy. Because I can imagine a lot of Americans would really like to go to AI and get a second opinion. I have on some of these issues, right? And I have said before, be careful with AI. AI gets a lot of things wrong, but it's really, really good if you compare it to just a standard Google search. If you compare it to going to the library, pulling out the little box, and then using the Dewey Decimal System and scrolling through, and then trying to read through a whole book, and then figure out that that wasn't the book you needed anyway, right? Right. So, like, we've improved in our means of research. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't be reading stuff. That doesn't mean that things won't be wrong. They could be wrong for any number of reasons. Maybe it hallucinates, right? It just makes up stuff, which has happened. Maybe it makes incorrect connections. Maybe it misses out valuable information, which I've found it to do quite often, right? Maybe it just comes to you, gives you an assessment, and then you look at it and you're like, that logically doesn't make sense. And you argue the point for 20 minutes, and then you find out that you've won an argument, which has happened to me, right? So, and then Reason Magazine, they did an article on it as well. Theirs was titled, "This Bill in New York State Would Protect Lawyers from AI Competition." So if you're a New Yorker in trouble with the law, it might be impossible for you to consult your favorite chatbot for legal advice. Last week, the New York State Senate Internet and Technology Committee unanimously passed Senate Bill S7263. The bill would hold AI companies liable specifically for harm caused by chatbots performing tasks that, if carried out by a human, would constitute unauthorized practice of a licensed profession, such as providing medical diagnoses or legal counsel. The bill would also require chatbot deployers, such as OpenAI, Anthropic, and xAI, to provide clear, conspicuous, and explicit notice to users that they are interacting with artificial intelligence chatbot program. However, doing so does not allow these companies to disclaim responsibility for the outputs of their chatbots. So it, on the surface, might sound good, right? You know, it's the whole, oh, would you allow somebody to operate on your brain that doesn't have a medical license? However, this really isn't that different than just doing a Google search or going to the library on your own. Other than it has access to more information and can more quickly get you to an answer. But I would argue it is still your responsibility to read, and then read some more, right? AI does not absolve you from reading because it gets things wrong, or sometimes it doesn't get it wrong, but I'll look at it and I will say, I understand where AI has come to this conclusion. I think it's wrong. Then I'll make my argument. And sometimes I win. Sometimes I actually don't win. Sometimes AI is like, nope. I just have to. And then finally I'm like, okay, I guess I'm not right on this one. Or I don't have a strong enough argument, or I don't have enough information necessary, whatever. It could be those things, right? But ultimately, AI is nothing more than a faster version of what everybody's already been doing. So let's take a look at that bill, and we will see what's in there. So here we go. Back up on the screen for you guys. Where is that? There we go. I'm reading from the bill. So you know what the bill says. You know that these articles aren't just making it up. Because I've read news articles, journalists, that'll be like, a study says this, and I'll go read the study, and I'm like, it did not say that at all. Or a bill says this, and I'm like, yeah, that doesn't say that either, right? So you have to double check things, right? That's the whole point of this show, is to teach you guys that it's not that hard, just it requires some reading. So a proprietor of a chatbot shall not permit such chatbot to provide any substantive response, information, or advice, or take any action which, if taken by a natural person, we go here, all right, would constitute a crime under Section 6512 or 6513 of the education law. Here's where it's going to get a little bit dry, all right? Bueller, all right? 60, of the education law in relation to the professions whose licensure is governed under Articles 131, 133, 135, 136, 137, 139, 141, 143, 145, 147, 153, 154, and 163 of the education law. Now, DL, why would you read that? Because I want to show you why tarring and feathering might still be of value to our country. What's her name again? Let me look. What was her name? Let's see. Let's go back to her name real quick here. Senator Kristen Gonzalez, Democrat out of Queens, right? Nice smiley little face there that we saw on the screen. She thought it would be okay to write a bill that references other bills by just simply writing in the whole word for the number and not reference what they're referring to. Like, that's insane. Like, she should be, like, kicked out of office just for that. Let's see, where did it, let's see here. One of these articles laid them all out. Okay. Oh, yeah. Here it is. On Reason Magazine. Let's go back to Reason Magazine real quick. I'll put it up on the screen for you guys. Okay. Reason Magazine did what our elected officials should be doing, which is make a law readable. Okay. Like, they could have done it. Like, that's not the whole, like, I'm just reading you a snippet of the law. Like, it starts out and it's like, here are the definitions that we're using so that you understand what we mean when we use these words like chatbot and AI and stuff like that. That's great. I like that. That's appropriate. But then they go in there like law 1, 2, 3, 4, and they just like list a whole bunch of numbers. Here's what they S7263, as currently written, would not just apply to the licensed professions of psychology and mental health services, but to medicine, veterinary medicine, dentistry, physical therapy, pharmacy, nursing, podiatry, optometry, engineering, architecture, and social work as well. Right? Like, they should have listed all of those, bullet point them in the law, so that I understand what it is you're trying to regulate. Because to me, it looks like they're just trying to regulate some numbers, right? A whole bunch of numbers here. And that's just ridiculous. So I'm going to skewer this representative for, she probably didn't write the law herself, but for sponsoring it and saying, this is okay for my constituents to read. We got things to do, Representative, like pay our bills, go outside and work in the yard, and then have allergies beat us up in the nasal cavity, right? We got important things to do. I don't got time to go through and say, all right, let me search each one of these friggin' numbers so I know whether or not I agree with this legislation. You can't tell from this. It's ridiculous. All right. It goes on and says, or would violate the provisions of Article 15 of the judiciary law prohibiting the practice or appearances as an attorney at law without being admitted and registered under such article. So in other words, you're like, if you are not a legal attorney, you can't give out this information if you're a chat bot, right? That would be illegal. Okay, well, I could read that. That makes sense. You said literally the words attorney at law, but then you added all these other numbers, so I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know if it's a good idea or a bad idea. So, excuse me. Then it ends up, it's like a 3-page bill. It's not very long. You could read it yourself, but I just wanted to get to the core point of it. A proprietor may not waive or disclaim this liability merely by notifying consumers that they are interacting with the non-human chatbot system. So you can't even be like, because like sometimes I'll get on there and I'll be like, hey, I've got a headache, for these symptoms, do you think this is appropriate? Would it be better to take this drug or this drug, and why? And it'll say, like, I'm not a doctor, so, consult with your doctor, but here's what the internet says. Basically what my chatbot says. And so then I'll read it and I'll make an assessment, right? And I can choose whether I want to, follow it or not. Whatever the case is. Yeah, I do it for this show. I'll read through it and I'll be like, That makes sense. And then I'll go and I'll look at the source information. I'll say, what does the primary source say? Primary source agrees with this. Okay, great. Right? All I'm really doing is using AI as a research assistant. Go and find this information and send it back to me and I'll review it. Rather than me having to go and, find all the links, because the old school way of doing things, I'm old enough to remember two ways of having to go and find information. The first way, the original way for me, was I would go to the library and I would start researching, and then I would end up just digging through the card system, the Dewey Decimal System, and then finding books, and then I have to go find a book, and then I have to read through the book, either skim it or read it to figure out, okay, does this book have the information that I'm looking for? And then, is the information, does it sound like it's quality information? Is there any way for me to verify it, right? Like all this. It was a very tedious way of researching. Then we got Google, and you could just type in something and you'd get a whole bunch of links. So it just kind of expedited the process of giving you sources to go review. So then I would have to review all those sources and be like, all right, what about, blah, blah, blah. And but I wouldn't have any assessment whatsoever in either one of these cases. Like, I don't even know if this is where the direction that I want to go in. So I would read like a website, a page, and then I'd be like, or a PDF or something like that Google returned. And then sometimes I'd be like, yeah, that's not what I was looking for. And so maybe I spent 20 minutes reading something, and that's 20 minutes I lost on information that wasn't what I was looking for, right? Or was going in the wrong direction. Wrong direction, not necessarily meaning the answer that I was looking for, but just like a different direction altogether, right? So it was kind of tangential, but not quite the same direction of what I was looking for. And so it was less tedious because I could at least get a bunch of results. And then there were problems, of course, because people would game the system so their result got higher, and you'd have to filter out Bob's website, who you don't know who Bob is, so you don't know if he's reputable. Like, he might be a really smart guy and has done all the work, and you should really listen to him, or he could just be some quack nobody that's just talking online, and you should ignore him completely. Like, you just never knew, right? So it was still relatively tedious. Now we have AI; it's less tedious, and I say less because you still got to read, right? But now I can go in there and I could be like, I could take my drink. I could say, here's this buy drink. It's filtering out. It's the green screen's taking out the green cap. But that's why it's not spilling all over. But so I could say, hey, I could take a picture of the ingredients, and I could say, tell me about these ingredients. And AI will tell me about the ingredients, and I can say, give me a primary source. And what I've done, and I do regularly, I will exclude certain sources. Like, I'll exclude Wikipedia, because Wikipedia, not to dog on it, it's a valuable tool, I think. But the problem with Wikipedia is all it does is cite other sources, right? Well, I'm using AI for that, so I don't really need Wikipedia anymore. I need the direct links. I don't need an AI to summarize something and then give me a link to something that also is summarizing it, and then I have to go through and read it and get all the links. So what I'll do is I'll research something and I'll say, hey, provide me direct, tell me if all these ingredients are generally considered to be safe, or any ingredients that, that I should be skeptical of. And so it might come back and it might say, well, this one you should be skeptical of, and here's why. And so then I can go, can you give me some primary source links for that? And then it might link me to Harvard. It might link me to, whatever, or it might link me to somebody's blog page, which has happened a few times. And then I can open the blog page and I can go, yeah, I don't want that. Right. So AI is just a research assistant. That's all it is. And the value add, like it was saying in the articles, is that if you don't have a lot of money to reach out to somebody in a profession and spend their time, then this can help you narrow down, right, the information that you need to walk in with. So for instance, let's say I want to go to the doctor, and I think that I have a rare disorder, right? I can use AI to kind of help me narrow down and ask the right questions and say, okay, I think I have this rare disorder. And it might go like, okay, blah, blah, blah. And I can say, what kind of things might I look for? You might look for this. You might look for this. Okay, what degree might I look for these? Right? Like, yeah, my finger was trembling one day. Does that mean I got Alzheimer's or something like that, right? Or Parkinson's? And not Alzheimer's. I meant Parkinson's. But like, does that mean I've got Parkinson's? And then AI can say, well, in, the majority of the population, this is, this finger twitch on this particular finger happens, very regularly. So it's a significant sign. Or it might say, actually, for what you're describing, that sounds like it's a less significant sign. It sounds closer to something like this. Maybe you've got a pinched nerve, blah, blah, blah. And then I can say, let's explore the pinched nerve. And then we can explore the pinched nerve. And so then when I go to the doctor, who I'm going to have a limited amount of time with, I can go in and I can go in with as a better patient. And I can say, hey, doc, I was doing my research and I started out thinking I had Parkinson's, but we've landed on, I probably just got, a pinched nerve somewhere. Here are some of the things that I'm describing. Here are some of the reasons why I think it might be a pinched nerve. What can you tell me? Right. And so then we can get to this conversation more quickly in the limited amount of time that I have already with this person. Right. The other thing that you could do for other professionals, let's say that I'm mad at somebody and I want to sue them. Like, hey, my neighbor was saying mean things about me on Facebook, right? I can go on there and be like, hey, do I have a lawsuit against them? And they might say, no, actually you don't, based on what you're describing. And you could even give them the link and they could say, this is more than likely protected speech, blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what? Now I can save me some money from spending time with the lawyer who might charge me however many dollars an hour, right? I can limit this. So the fact that we're limiting this, the fact that we're trying to regulate AI from the most valuable use that people have is horrible. It's terrible. We shouldn't be doing that. Disgusting. We should push back against this, right? So I object to the bill, S7263, which I don't think I caught the name of it. What is the name of it? I think there's a specific name of it. Let's see. Let me pull up the name here. I forgot to give you the name. It just imposes liability for damages caused by a chatbot impersonating certain licensed professionals. Oh man, I wish I had seen that. So it's not impersonating. Impersonating would be like trying to mislead me and be like, yo, I'm really a doctor. And then they're not. And I believe that you're actually a doctor. It's fair for AI to just be like, not a doctor. I'm just reading the internet and I'm giving you information based on what you've put in. Here's what we determined. It's a research assistant. That's what it is. That's what we need to be focusing on with people. Remember during COVID, one of my big things, people were like, you don't do your research. You're not a professional. And I was like, okay, whatever. Because I determined that I didn't need to get the COVID vaccine. I determined it based on my read of a lot of medical literature, a lot of studies, a lot of reports, whatever, blah, blah. And I read that and I was like, I don't think that I am in a risk category. As it turns out, I was not only right, I was right for the reasons that I said I was right for. That's the important part. Not that I was right. People can be right and have gotten their logic wrong, right? Basically a guess. That wasn't me, right? I did my research. I want a society where people go out and do their own research. And I want a society where we promote the idea of doing your own research, but we also say, here's how to do it well. Here's how when you're doing it. Here's how how to know when you're doing it poorly. That is the better society that we can live in. All right, I need to wrap this up so we can get back to work. So let me just, I'll just touch upon this very, very quickly here. Somebody threw this to my attention. It's called the 80% bill. So I had to look at it, read it. So apparently there's a pledge that you will not support candidates who, sign the pledge. Let me click on sign the pledge here. Let me read it here. It says, by completing this form, I state that I will not vote for anyone who does not actively support this bill. Okay. And then you've got specific bills that you can mention. Okay. But if you go back, it's actually got a bunch of bills. Those are a little misleading because it says the 80% bill. So it says every article below is supported by at least 80% of American voters. Browse the bills, read the details, click through to congress.gov for the full legislation. This is the kind of thing that I can appreciate, even if because I'm going down here and I'm seeing things that I agree with. I'm seeing things I don't agree with. So for instance, end forever wars, repeal outdated authorizations, AUMFs, to return war powers to Congress. Totally agree. Now, I might have to read the legislation to see if I like the language, but I agree with it on the surface. Then we go down here to number 4, tax the ultra wealthy, close tax loopholes and establish a minimum tax for billionaires. Totally oppose that one. Not on board with this. I don't care if 80% of Americans agree with it or not. I don't care if 99% of Americans agree with it or not. I don't. They're wrong. End of story, right? But I like this idea where I don't like the idea of like maybe a pledge, because then maybe that kind of gets around the idea of people reading these things. But it does encourage people to read them. It does link to the bills so that you can read them and say, do I agree with this or not? And am I going to support the person who is sponsoring this bill, maybe the co-sponsors, so on and so forth, right? So when it comes to research, when it comes to reading, when it comes to legislation, when it comes to learning anything, I fully support it. I encourage you to do it yourself. I will be going through some of these. If the bills are still making some movement, which I think they are, I will probably do some bill reviews on some of these. Maybe not all of them. Some of them I feel like, maybe is kind of goes without saying. Ban congressional stock trading seems kind of like it goes without saying, right? But then you've got other ones that, people might argue a little bit more vociferously with. End forever wars, when you're repealing the AUMFs, a lot of people might say, no, we can't repeal them. We need them still, right? So I can go through them, but I'll look through some of these and I'll be talking about them in the future. And I want to give a little shout out to, I believe it's Chuckin' Money. He's the one that tagged me. I think it's a he. Tagged me on social media and said, hey, have you heard about this? And I was like, no, I haven't. I'll check it out. So here we are talking about it. So thank you. And I just want to let you know, when I ask you guys to reach out to me and let me know about things, I do respond. Sometimes I'm a little delayed. So if you message me and then I don't respond to you for like 3 weeks and then all of a sudden out of nowhere you hear from me, that has happened more than once, actually. So sometimes I do get behind on getting back with people, but I try to get back with everyone that reaches out to me and says, hey, man, check this out, right? But there's only so much time that I have. So I just wanted to point that out for you today, folks. Let's see here. Let's look back into the comments really, really quickly here and see what we got going on. Bill seems a little shorter today. We talked about that earlier. Yeah, it's because where he's sitting on the ground. Let's see here. I'm a math nerd. We always showed our work. Yes, always show your work. Let's see. What was I? Oh yeah, I did that. Not bill review. I did that review on Andrew Wilson. I think it was Friday on my Dad Talk. And there was a girl that was, like, oh, he's a rapist, blah, blah, blah. And, when you make a claim, the bigger the claim, the more evidence you should be putting out to support your claim, right? In that particular case, you're not necessarily going to link to documents per se, but you should always be able to provide evidence for what you believe. In other words, show your homework. So like in the show notes, you will see there's a whole bunch of links, like 4 or 5 links related to today's episode. There have been past episodes where I've had closer to probably like 10 or 15 links. So I try to always give the links so that you guys can go behind me and you can say, he's done all the work, a lot of work. Let me go see if I agree with him. And then you can come back in the chat later and you can be like, DL, I went through your show notes. I clicked on all the links. I read the stuff that you said I should read. And I came to an entirely different conclusion because turns out you can't read. Okay, do that. Hold me accountable. Let's see. What else? Is there a correlation between math people and libertarian leaning? Wouldn't go that far. But there is a correlation between being ornery and being libertarian. Just saying, throwing that out there. All right, folks, that's my show for today. Hope you found it informative and inspiring. I hope you're now going to go and read a bunch of bills and then come back and tell me, DL, you totally got to read about this bill. Whatever the case, let me know your thoughts in the show notes. Come back later. Helps out the algorithm. Makes me feel good because then I'm like, oh, you watched my show and you had some further thoughts. That's awesome. I love it. So go do that for me, folks. But with that being said, I'm out. I will see you tomorrow, and I will do my best, absolute best, to be on time. Have a good one. You know that I'm all about supporting organizations that hold my values. Make sure you head on over to blackgunsmatter.shop. They've got apparel, stickers, and more. Use the code LibertyDad, all one word, at checkout to score a 10% discount. Or just hit the referral link in the show notes. That'll make it so much easier. Remember, I'm not just a voice on a mic. I'm a dad who's working hard to deliver to you the best libertarian content. Connect with me on Linktree, where you'll find links to my Patreon and buy me a coffee, because every bit helps keep this show rolling. Plus, you can find me on my other platforms to stay in the loop. With your help, this show, the message of liberty will be seen and heard by more people. As always, I appreciate you tuning in and look forward to seeing you in the next episode.